Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the sky change color. The morning had started like any other Tuesday, with coffee that tasted like motor oil and reports about routine patrol missions around Earth's outer satellites. Now he was staring at massive alien ships that made the biggest human vessels look like toy boats. The alien fleet descended through the clouds with all the grace of floating cities. Each ship gleamed with polished metal that caught the sunlight and threw it back in rainbows. Blue and purple lights pulsed along their hulls in patterns that probably meant something important to someone. Somewhere, Jake counted at least 12 of the giant vessels, each one easily large enough to hold a small city. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez sat at her console, her fingers dancing across the controls as she tried to make sense of the readings. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation ponytail, but several strands had escaped to frame her confused expression. She had been monitoring space traffic for 3 years and had never seen anything like this. "Captain, they're broadcasting on every frequency we have," she reported, her voice tight with excitement and worry. "Radio, television, internet, even the emergency channels. Whatever they want to say, they want everyone to hear it." Jake nodded and straightened his uniform jacket. He was a tall man with graying hair at his temples and laugh lines around his eyes from too many years of finding humor in dangerous situations. "Today might test that sense of humor more than usual. Put it on the main screen," he ordered. The bridge fell silent as the view screen flickered to life. What appeared before them was unlike anything in human imagination or science fiction movies. The alien stood at least 12 feet tall with 4 arms that moved in graceful gestures. Its skin had a blue-green shimmer like oil on water, and its head was crowned with what looked like living crystal that caught and reflected light in impossible ways. The creature wore robes that seemed to be cut from captured starlight itself. The fabric moved and flowed like liquid mercury, while displaying patterns of distant galaxies and nebulae. Golden chains hung from its neck, each one holding gems that pulsed with their own inner fire. Rings covered all 4 hands, and each ring held a different colored stone that sparkled as the alien gestured. But it was the alien's expression that made Jake bite his lip to keep from smiling. The creature looked like someone who had spent hours practicing this speech in front of a mirror, and was very proud of how important they sounded. "Greetings, primitive inhabitants of the 3rd planet from your small yellow star," the alien announced in a voice that somehow managed to boom and whine at the same time. The translation software had no trouble with the language, but the tone came through clearly enough. This was someone who was very impressed with themselves. Ensign Pete Carter, barely out of the academy and still young enough to be amazed by everything, leaned forward in his seat. His blonde hair fell across his forehead as he strained to hear every word. He had dreamed of first contact his entire life, though he had probably imagined something more like the movies and less like a cosmic drama performance. "I am Supreme Admiral Zixthilla the Magnificent," the alien continued, pausing as if expecting applause. "Herald of the Eternal Galactic Empire, Keeper of 1,000 conquered worlds, Bearer of the Sacred Crystal of Ultimate Authority, Master of the Stellar Fleet, Guardian of the Cosmic Order, and Defender of Galactic Peace through superior firepower." Jake felt his eyebrows climb toward his hairline. Behind him, he could hear someone make a small choking sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. The alien had more titles than a medieval king and seemed just as pleased with them. "Your species has been observed and evaluated," Zixthilla announced, raising all 4 arms in what was probably meant to be an impressive gesture. "We have determined that you are suitable for incorporation into our glorious empire. This is a great honor that has been bestowed upon only the most worthy civilizations." Amy turned in her chair to look at Jake, her brown eyes wide with disbelief. She had studied alien contact protocols for years, but none of the textbooks had covered what to do when the aliens sounded like they were reading from a children's book about space emperors. "You will now prepare for the ceremony of absolute surrender," Zixthilla continued, his voice growing even more dramatic. "Your leaders will present themselves at the designated location, where they will kneel before our infinite wisdom and acknowledge the superiority of the Galactic Empire. Following this ceremony, your species will be assigned suitable roles within our vast organization." Pete raised his hand slightly, then caught himself and lowered it. Old habits from school died hard even when facing alien contact. "Sir," he whispered to Jake, "did he just say ceremony of absolute surrender?" Jake nodded slowly. The alien was still talking, describing something about glorious submission and the honor of serving the Empire. Each word made the whole thing sound more like a very elaborate practical joke. Furthermore, Zixathilla announced, "You will be granted the privilege of contributing to our great works. Your species will join our other valued members in maintaining the glory and majesty of our eternal reign across the stars." The alien paused again, clearly expecting some kind of response. When none came, he seemed to grow more agitated. His crystal crown pulsed brighter, and the gems on his chains began to glow. "Do not mistake our generous offer for weakness," he declared, his voice rising. "The Galactic Empire commands fleets that could reduce your planet to cosmic dust. Our weapons have shattered moons and turned suns cold. Entire civilizations have begged for the mercy we now offer you freely." That was when Jake lost the battle with his composure. A small snort of laughter escaped before he could stop it. The sound seemed to break some kind of spell on the bridge. Amy's shoulders began to shake with suppressed giggles. Pete made a sound like he was choking on his own spit. Even the usually serious navigation officer was studying his console very intently while his face turned red. "I'm sorry," Jake said, trying to pull himself together. "Did you just threaten to turn our sun cold? Is that actually a thing your weapons can do, or is that more of a metaphorical threat?" Zixathilla paused mid-gesture, looking confused by the question. This was clearly not the response he had expected. His forearms froze in their dramatic pose while his crystal crown flickered uncertainly. "The Empire's power is beyond your comprehension," he said. But there was less confidence in his voice now. "Perhaps you do not understand the honor being offered to your primitive species." "Oh, we understand," Jake replied, no longer trying to hide his amusement. "You want us to have a surrender ceremony where our leaders kneel down and then you'll give us jobs in your space empire. It's very generous of you to offer us work after we surrender our entire planet." The alien's confusion was growing more obvious. This conversation was not following the script he had clearly prepared. His robes continued to swirl with cosmic patterns, but somehow they seemed less impressive now, more like an elaborate costume than the garments of a galactic conqueror. Amy had given up trying to hide her laughter and was openly grinning at her console. The whole situation had moved beyond first contact protocols, and into something that felt more like watching a very serious child explain their imaginary kingdom. The bridge crew waited to see what would happen next. But one thing was already clear. If this was how the Galactic Empire conducted its conquests, humanity was in for a very interesting time. President Linda Hayes walked into the massive conference hall in Geneva and tried very hard not to stare at what the aliens had done to the place. The normally elegant meeting room had been transformed into something that looked like a cross between a royal throne room and a Las Vegas stage show. Golden banners hung from the ceiling, each one covered in symbols that probably meant something important but looked like fancy doodles. Holographic displays floated in the air showing what appeared to be previous alien conquests, complete with dramatic lighting and sweeping camera angles. The red carpet leading to the main table literally glowed with its own light, pulsing in rhythm with some unheard cosmic music. Crystal formations had been placed around the room, each one humming softly and casting rainbow patterns on the walls. The whole setup screamed of someone trying very hard to look impressive and important. Secretary of State Rick Thompson walked beside the president, his weathered face carefully neutral. He had spent 30 years in diplomacy and had seen his share of theatrical politicians, but this was something entirely new. His gray suit looked almost boring next to the alien decorations, which he suspected was exactly the point. General Sam Parker brought up the rear of the human delegation, his military bearing making him look like a man preparing for battle rather than a peace conference. His uniform was crisp and practical, a sharp contrast to the cosmic light show surrounding them. He had fought in 3 wars and negotiated dozens of ceasefires, but nothing had prepared him for aliens who seemed to have learned diplomacy from watching old movies about kings and emperors. The alien delegation stood at attention, near what could only be described as a throne made of crystallized starlight. 7 different species were represented, each one more elaborately dressed than the last. They had clearly spent considerable time arranging themselves for maximum dramatic impact. Supreme Admiral Zixathilla stepped forward, his 4 arms spread wide in welcome. His robes had somehow become even more spectacular since the first broadcast, now featuring what looked like live footage of distant galaxies swirling across the fabric. His crystal crown had grown additional layers, making him look like he was wearing a small chandelier. "Behold the majesty of the Galactic Empire," he announced, his voice echoing in the chamber through speakers that had been hidden throughout the room. "The Supreme Council of Galactic Dominion honors your primitive species with their presence in person." He gestured grandly to his left, where a creature that looked like a cross between a giant lobster and a Christmas tree stood covered in medals and ribbons. General Quertuiop, the Destroyer of Hope, victor of 1,000 battles, crusher of rebellions, and master of strategic devastation. The lobster tree creature stepped forward and saluted with what appeared to be 6 different appendages. The movement made his medals jingle like wind chimes, which somewhat undermined the intimidating effect he was probably going for. "Admiral MNV-CXZ, the Crusher of Dreams," Zixthilla continued, indicating a floating jellyfish-like being whose transparent body pulsed with ominous dark colors. "Scourge of the Outer Rim, Terror of the Deep Void, and Bringer of Inevitable Doom." The jellyfish creature bobbed in what might have been a bow, its tentacles trailing ribbons and ceremonial decorations that made it look more like a party decoration than a harbinger of doom. "And finally," Zixthilla said with even more dramatic flair, "Supreme Overlord Astafkk, the Bringer of Eternal Sorrow, Master of Psychological Warfare, Destroyer of Civilizations, and Keeper of the Sacred Flames of Conquest." The third alien looked remarkably like a large teddy bear, if teddy bears wore elaborate military uniforms covered in so many decorations that he could barely move his arms. His fuzzy face tried to look menacing, but the effect was somewhat spoiled by what appeared to be naturally occurring smile lines around his eyes. President Hayes pressed her lips together and tried to maintain her diplomatic composure. Rick Thompson was studying the ceiling with intense concentration. General Parker had developed a sudden interest in his shoes. "These noble beings," Zixthilla continued, "have conquered more worlds than your species has words. They have brought order to chaos and civilization, to the barbaric reaches of space." The Supreme Admiral reached into his robes and pulled out what looked like a piece of parchment that had been bedazzled by someone with access to craft supplies and too much free time. The document sparkled and glittered under the room's lights, covered in swirling text written in what appeared to be glitter paint. "This is the sacred scroll of submission," he announced, holding the sparkly document above his head. "A binding contract that will formalize your species' entry into our glorious empire." He unrolled the scroll with a flourish, revealing page after page of elaborate calligraphy interspersed with golden seals, rainbow ribbons, and what looked suspiciously like stickers shaped like stars and planets. "Simply sign here," Zixthilla said, pointing to a line at the bottom that was marked with a large arrow decorated with tiny gems, "and your species will be granted the tremendous honor of serving as our designated snack preparation personnel for the next 1,000 standard galactic years." The silence in the room was deafening. President Hayes blinked several times as if trying to make sure she had heard correctly. Rick Thompson's diplomatic mask finally cracked and his mouth fell slightly open. General Parker looked up from his shoes with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Snack preparation personnel," President Hayes repeated slowly, as if testing the words to make sure they meant what she thought they meant. "Indeed," Zixthilla confirmed proudly. "Your species will have the privilege of creating nutritious and delicious foods for the Empire's noble warriors as they continue their glorious conquests across the galaxy. It is a position of great responsibility and honor." That was when President Hayes lost the battle with her composure. A small giggle escaped, then another, and suddenly she was laughing so hard that tears formed in her eyes. The sound was contagious, spreading to Rick Thompson, who began to chuckle despite 30 years of diplomatic training. General Parker, a man who rarely smiled and never laughed during official business, found himself shaking with barely controlled mirth. "I'm sorry," President Hayes gasped between fits of laughter. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You want our entire species to sign a bedazzled contract agreeing to be your cosmic kitchen staff for the next 1,000 years, and you're calling this an honor." The alien delegation looked confused. This was clearly not how their previous conquests had gone. General Quertuiop's medals jingled uncertainly as he shifted his weight. Admiral MNBV Kexis's jellyfish body flickered between colors as if unsure what emotion to display. Supreme Overlord Astef KJK, the teddy bear, tried to look more menacing, but only succeeded in looking like a stuffed animal having an identity crisis. "Perhaps you do not fully appreciate the significance of this offer," Zixthilla said, his confidence wavering slightly. Many civilizations would consider it a great privilege to serve the Empire in any capacity. "Oh, I'm sure they would," President Hayes replied, wiping tears from her eyes. "But you'll have to forgive us for finding the whole situation a bit amusing. You've traveled across the galaxy in ships the size of cities to offer us jobs as your personal chefs." Rick Thompson had recovered enough to speak, though his voice still shook with suppressed laughter. "Might I ask what happens to species who decline this generous offer?" Zixthilla straightened to his full impressive height, his crystal crown blazing with renewed authority. "Those who refuse the Empire's generous terms face the consequences of their short-sightedness. They are condemned to continue their primitive existence without the guidance and protection that only we can provide." General Parker looked up sharply. "So if we say no, you leave us alone?" "Well, yes," Zixthilla admitted, "but you would miss out on all the benefits of Imperial membership, such as protection from cosmic threats and access to our advanced technologies." The human delegation exchanged glances. The whole situation had moved beyond bizarre and into the realm of pure comedy. Here was an alien empire that conquered worlds by offering them jobs and then threatened to leave them alone if they refused. President Hayes composed herself with considerable effort and put on her most professional diplomatic voice. "We appreciate your generous offer, Supreme Admiral, but I think our species might need some time to consider such a momentous decision." "Time," Zixthilla repeated, as if the concept was foreign to him. "How much time would your primitive decision-making processes require?" "Oh, let's say about 1,000 years, President Hayes replied with a perfectly straight face. The alien delegation erupted into confused chatter in several different languages, none of which sounded particularly threatening. Whatever else was true about the Galactic Empire, they had clearly never encountered anyone who found their conquest methods amusing rather than intimidating. Dr. Kevin Walsh stepped aboard the alien flagship and tried not to laugh at what he saw. The corridors of the mighty warship looked more like the inside of a luxury cruise ship than a vessel of conquest. Soft carpet covered the floors in patterns that reminded him of hotel lobbies, while the walls were decorated with paintings of previous alien victories that looked suspiciously like tourist photos, with dramatic lighting added later. Commander Lisa Brooks walked beside him, her military training keeping her expression neutral despite the bizarre surroundings. She had served on dozens of human ships and space stations, but nothing had prepared her for hallways lined with what appeared to be cosmic gift shops selling souvenirs from conquered worlds. Their alien guide was a cheerful creature that looked like a purple penguin wearing a bellhop uniform. It waddled ahead of them with obvious enthusiasm, pointing out features of the ship like a tour guide showing off a 5-star hotel. "And here we have the Grand Hall of Glorious Victories," the purple penguin announced, gesturing toward a room filled with display cases containing what looked like participation trophies from various planets. Each trophy was labeled with things like Best Surrender Ceremony and Most Enthusiastic Submission to Imperial Rule. Dr. Walsh pulled out his tablet and began taking notes. As Earth's leading expert on alien cultures, he had been assigned to study the Galactic Empire and figure out what made them tick. So far, what he had discovered was both fascinating and completely ridiculous. The ship's main computer system was happy to share information about previous conquests, apparently viewing them as great success stories worth bragging about. Dr. Walsh had spent 3 days reviewing the files, and each victory followed the same basic pattern. The Empire fleet would arrive at a primitive world with great fanfare and elaborate ceremonies. The local inhabitants would be impressed by the massive ships and dramatic presentations. After suitable amounts of pageantry, the locals would agree to join the Empire in exchange for protection and access to advanced technology. Then the real pattern became clear. Within months of each conquest, the newly joined species would quietly take over most of the actual work of running things. They would maintain the ships, organize the supply chains, handle communications, manage logistics, and basically keep the Empire functioning, while the original conquest species focused on looking important and planning their next dramatic arrival somewhere else. "Commander Brooks," Dr. Walsh called to his military liaison. "You need to see this." He pulled up a holographic display showing the Empire's fleet composition. What appeared to be mighty warships were revealed in detailed schematics to be essentially giant recreational vehicles designed for maximum comfort and minimum actual combat capability. "Look at this," Dr. Walsh said, pointing to various ship systems. Those devastating plasma cannons they keep talking about are actually high-powered spotlights, designed to create impressive light shows. The shields that can supposedly withstand planet killing. Weapons are really just fancy force fields, meant to keep space debris from scratching the paint. Commander Brooks studied the technical readouts with growing amazement. What about their armor and personal weapons? Dr. Walsh switched to another display showing the elaborate uniforms and equipment worn by the Empire's leadership. The invincible battle armor is mostly ceremonial padding, designed to make them look bigger and more intimidating. The energy weapons they carry are essentially very expensive laser pointers that might be able to pop balloons if you held them close enough. The Purple Penguin guide had wandered back to check on them. Overhearing the conversation, "Oh yes," it said cheerfully. "The Empire focuses very much on the visual presentation of power rather than the practical application. We find that most species are so impressed by the pageantry that they never bother to look too closely at the actual capabilities." Commander Brooks stared at the alien. "Are you telling us that your entire military is basically a theater troupe?" "Theater troupe might be a harsh way to put it," the Penguin replied thoughtfully. "We prefer to think of ourselves as cosmic diplomats who specialize in dramatic negotiations. Much more civilized than actual warfare, don't you think?" Dr. Walsh was already pulling up more files, his scientific curiosity completely engaged. The deeper he dug into the Empire's history, the clearer the pattern became. The original founding species of the Empire had been genuinely powerful conquerors thousands of years ago. But over the centuries, they had gradually transitioned from actual military force to elaborate psychological theater. "It's brilliant in its own way," he explained to Commander Brooks. "They discovered that most primitive species are so impressed by grand displays of technology and authority that they'll voluntarily submit without any actual fighting. Then once the new species joins the Empire, they naturally start taking care of all the practical details because someone has to keep things running." The files showed dozens of member species, each one contributing their particular expertise to keeping the Empire functioning. One aquatic species handled all the plumbing and water systems across the fleet. A group of insectoid engineers maintained the technical systems. Several different species worked together to grow and prepare food for everyone. Meanwhile, the original conquest species spent their time designing new ceremonies, planning dramatic arrivals at potential new member worlds, and generally acting like cosmic celebrities on a permanent tour of the galaxy. "So they're not actually conquerors at all," Commander Brooks said slowly. "They're more like a traveling circus that convinces planets to join their show." "Exactly," Dr. Walsh replied. "And all the member species seem perfectly happy with the arrangement. They get protection from real threats, access to advanced technology, and the chance to be part of something bigger than their individual worlds. In exchange, they handle the actual work while the leadership focuses on putting on a good show." Back on Earth, similar discoveries were being made by other research teams. The Empire's mighty fleet was powered by fusion reactors that were marvels of clean energy, but couldn't actually hurt anything more dangerous than a large asteroid. Their navigation systems were incredibly sophisticated, but designed for comfort and efficiency, rather than tactical maneuvering. Most telling of all were the personal quarters of the Empire's leadership. Supreme Admiral Zixthilla's private cabin was decorated like a luxury hotel suite, complete with a hot tub, a collection of exotic plants from conquered worlds, and what appeared to be a very sophisticated entertainment system for watching recordings of previous conquest ceremonies. The alien's personal schedule showed a daily routine that included costume fittings, speech rehearsals, meditation sessions for maintaining proper dramatic presence, and something called imperial bearing practice that seemed to involve standing in front of a mirror and perfecting intimidating poses. Dr. Walsh was reviewing these files when an urgent message came through from Earth's Defense Command. Commander Brooks read the priority alert and her face went pale. "Doctor, we have a problem," she said, her military training taking over. "Long-range sensors have detected unknown ships approaching the solar system. They're not broadcasting any identification signals, and their energy signatures don't match anything in the Empire database." Dr. Walsh looked up from his research with concern. "How long until they arrive?" 6 hours at their current speed," Commander Brooks replied. "And Doctor, these ships look nothing like the Empire vessels. No decorative elements, no ceremonial lighting, just pure functional design built for one purpose." The purple penguin guide had overheard the conversation and was suddenly no longer cheerful. "Oh dear," it said, its voice filled with genuine worry. "That sounds like it might be the Void Hunters." "The what?" Dr. Walsh asked. "The reason the Empire travels the galaxy looking for new members," the penguin explained. "Its earlier enthusiasm completely gone. The Void Hunters are why we need protection. They're the real thing, Doctor. They're actually scary, unlike us." Commander Brooks was already activating her emergency communicator to contact Earth's defense forces. It seemed that humanity was about to discover the difference between cosmic theater and genuine galactic threats. The question was whether their new ridiculous alien friends were going to be any help when real danger finally arrived, or if Earth was going to have to face whatever was coming on their own. Captain Jake Morrison was drinking his morning coffee when every alarm on his ship started screaming at once. The peaceful routine of checking daily reports and monitoring routine patrol routes was shattered by the sound of alerts that meant only one thing. Something very bad was about to happen. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez spun around in her chair, her fingers flying across the sensor controls as data flooded her screens. Her face went pale as she processed the readings, and her voice shook slightly when she spoke. "Captain, we have multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system," she reported. "I count at least 20 vessels, but they're unlike anything in our databases or the Empire's files." Jake set down his coffee and moved to the main view screen. What he saw there made his blood run cold. The ships that emerged from the darkness of space looked like they had been carved from nightmares and powered by pure malice. Unlike the gleaming, decorative vessels of the Galactic Empire, these craft were all harsh angles and predatory curves. Their black hulls seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, making them look like tears in the fabric of space itself. "Any response to our hails?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Nothing, sir," Amy replied. "They're not responding to any communication attempts on any frequency. But they are broadcasting something." She put the transmission on the speakers, and immediately wished she hadn't. The sound that filled the bridge was like the screech of metal on metal mixed with the howl of a hurricane. When the translation software finally made sense of it, the message was simple and terrifying. "We consume all. We devour everything. We are eternal hunger. Resistance is meaningless." Ensign Pete Carter, who had been excited about first contact just days ago, now looked like he wanted to hide under his console. "Sir, that doesn't sound like they're here to negotiate." Before Jake could respond, another communication channel opened. This time it was Supreme Admiral Zixthilla, and for the first time since humanity had met him, the pompous alien sounded genuinely frightened. "Human vessels." The Supreme Admiral's voice crackled through the speakers, all traces of his usual dramatic flair gone. "We need your immediate assistance. The Void Hunters have found us." Jake opened a channel to the alien flagship. "Supreme Admiral, what exactly are we dealing with here?" "The Void Hunters are the reason we travel the galaxy seeking new member civilizations," Zixthilla explained, his voice shaking. "They consume entire species for sustenance. They turn populated worlds into empty rocks. They are the real threat that the Empire exists to protect against." On the view screen, the Void Hunter ships began to move with deadly grace. Their formation was perfect, their coordination flawless, and their intent unmistakably hostile. These were not theatrical performers or cosmic diplomats. These were predators, and they had found their prey. "So all this time, when you were conquering worlds and demanding submission," Jake said slowly, "you were actually recruiting them for protection against these things." "Yes," Zixthilla admitted, his four-armed gesture of despair visible even through the static-filled transmission. "We are not actually very good at fighting. We are much better at looking impressive and convincing people to join our protective alliance. But the Void Hunters care nothing for impressive displays or diplomatic ceremonies." The Void Hunter fleet was accelerating toward the inner system now, their ships moving with the purposeful efficiency of a pack of wolves closing in on a wounded deer. Advanced sensors showed their weapon systems charging, and the energy readings were unlike anything in human or Empire databases. General Sam Parker's voice came through on the military communication channel from Earth's Defense Command. "All ships, this is General Parker. We have a situation developing that requires immediate response. The alien contacts appear to be hostile, and our new friends from the Empire are requesting assistance." Jake looked around his bridge at his crew. Amy Rodriguez was running sensor sweeps and coordinating with other human vessels. Pete Carter was monitoring communications and looking considerably more mature than he had just minutes before. The bridge crew that had been laughing at alien pomposity just days ago now faced a genuine threat to their entire world. "General Parker," Jake responded, "what are your orders?" "All available ships are to take defensive positions around Earth," the general replied. "We're going to find out what humans do when someone actually threatens our home." What happened next surprised everyone, including the humans themselves. Without hesitation, without debate, and without any formal alliance agreements, the human fleet moved to intercept the Void Hunters. Not because humanity was particularly brave or noble, but because they had grown strangely fond of their ridiculous alien visitors. It was like watching someone pick on a weird but lovable cousin. Sure, the Empire was embarrassing with their dramatic speeches and glittery contracts, but they were their embarrassing cosmic cousins now, and nobody threatened family, even adoptive galactic family, without dealing with the consequences. President Linda Hayes opened a communication channel to both the Empire fleet and the approaching Void Hunters. Her voice was calm and professional, carrying the authority of someone who had spent years dealing with international crises. "Attention Void Hunter vessels," she broadcast. "This is President Hayes of Earth. You are approaching a protected system. Please state your intentions and respond to our communications." The response was immediate and chilling. The same metallic screech filled the communication channels, but this time the translation was even clearer. "We consume, we devour. We are eternal hunger. Your resistance will be brief." "Well," President Hayes said, switching to the fleet-wide communication channel. "That was unnecessarily dramatic. All ships, these guys seem like actual bad news, unlike our sparkly friends here. Let's show them how we handle real bullies." The Empire ships moved into formation alongside the human vessels, though their captains were clearly nervous about actual combat. Supreme Admiral Zix Thilla's voice came through on the command channel, and for the first time, he sounded like he was dropping the theatrical act. "Human allies," he said, "we must warn you that our weapons are not designed for serious combat. We have focused so much on impressive displays that our actual fighting capability is quite limited." "Don't worry about it," Jake replied, checking his ship's weapon systems. "We'll handle the fighting. You just try to stay out of the way and maybe use those spotlight cannons to blind them or something." The combined human Empire fleet spread out across the solar system's defensive perimeter. Human ships took point positions while Empire vessels provided support and sensor coverage. It was an unlikely alliance between genuine warriors and cosmic performers, brought together by the simple fact that some threats were too real to ignore. The Void Hunter ships continued their approach, their formation tightening as they prepared for battle. Their weapon systems were fully charged now, crackling with dark energy that seemed to bend light around it. These were creatures that had consumed countless civilizations, and they showed no sign of being impressed by either human determination or Empire theatrics. As the two fleets closed the distance between them, one thing became clear. The galaxy was about to witness something unprecedented, not just a battle between predators and prey, but a test of whether laughter and friendship could stand against genuine darkness when the stakes were survival itself. The battle began like every other space conflict in galactic history, with massive ships firing devastating weapons across the cold darkness between stars. But within minutes, something happened that the Void Hunters had never experienced in thousands of years of conquest and consumption. Their enemies started laughing at them. Captain Jake Morrison dodged a blast of dark energy that could have vaporized his entire ship, then immediately opened a communication channel to his crew. "Well, that was dramatic," he announced, his voice carrying the same tone he might use to comment on a bad movie. "Did everyone see that slow, ominous approach they just did? Very original, guys." Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez was coordinating defensive patterns with the Empire ships while somehow managing to provide running commentary like a sports broadcaster. "The Void Hunter on our starboard side is doing that thing where they pause dramatically before firing. I think they want us to be impressed by their scary red energy buildup." Ensign Pete Carter, who had grown up considerably in the past few days, was monitoring communications across the entire battle zone. "Captain, the Empire ships are asking if they should use their devastating plasma cannons as actual weapons instead of light shows." "Tell them yes," Jake replied, spinning his ship around a Void Hunter vessel that was trying to look menacing while charging its weapons, "and ask them if those cannons can actually do anything besides make pretty colors." Across the battle zone, Supreme Admiral Zixthilla was discovering that human tactical suggestions were surprisingly effective. His ship's weapons officer, a nervous creature that looked like a cross between a butterfly and a computer, was frantically adjusting the plasma cannon settings. Supreme Admiral, the butterfly computer reported, "The humans are correct. Our weapons can actually cause damage if we stop worrying about making them look impressive and focus on making them work properly." Zixthilla stared at his weapons display as his decorative light cannon suddenly became real military hardware. "Why did no one ever mention this before?" "You never asked us to actually hurt anything, sir," the weapons officer replied. "You always wanted maximum visual impact with minimum chance of damaging the surrender ceremonies." Meanwhile, Dr. Kevin Walsh had made a discovery that would change everything. Working from the combined databases of human and Empire science, he had found the one weakness that the Void Hunters had never encountered. They took themselves incredibly seriously and had no defense against ridicule. "All ships," President Hayes announced over the fleet communication channel. "This is Operation Mock and Awe. Dr. Walsh has identified a critical vulnerability in our opponents. They've spent so long being feared and respected that they have no idea how to handle being laughed at." What followed was the most devastating psychological warfare campaign in galactic history. Human ships began broadcasting running commentary on Void Hunter tactics like they were providing color analysis for a sporting event. Empire vessels joined in, their crews finally understanding that sometimes the best weapon against intimidation was refusing to be intimidated. "Oh, look. Another slow dramatic turn," Amy Rodriguez announced over the open communication channels. "They're really committed to this whole ominous space demon aesthetic, aren't they?" Captain Jake dodged another energy blast and immediately responded with tactical analysis delivered in the tone of a movie critic. "I appreciate the commitment to theme, but the execution is getting repetitive. We've seen this exact same attack pattern 4 times now." The Void Hunter ships began to falter in their formations. These were creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, whose mere presence had caused entire civilizations to surrender without fighting. They were accustomed to inspiring fear, despair, and hopeless resistance. They had never faced enemies who treated their carefully crafted image of cosmic horror like a community theater production. "This is impossible," screeched the Void Hunter fleet commander, his voice carrying across all communication frequencies. "You should be cowering in terror. You should be begging for mercy. You should be afraid." "Buddy," Jake replied cheerfully, "we've been dealing with politicians, reality television, and social media for decades. You're going to have to try a lot harder than spooky space demons to impress us." The psychological impact on the Void Hunters was immediate and devastating. Their attack formations, which had been perfected over thousands of years of successful conquests, began to fall apart as individual ships started hesitating and second-guessing their dramatic approaches. One Void Hunter captain, whose ship looked like a cross between a Gothic cathedral and a torture device, tried to regain the initiative with an especially ominous maneuver. He approached Jake's ship at an angle designed to maximize the intimidating silhouette, while his weapons charged with appropriately scary sound effects. "Behold your doom, primitive creatures," the Void Hunter announced in a voice like grinding metal. "We are the darkness between the stars, the hunger that devours worlds, the end of all hope." "That's a really good villain speech," Jake replied appreciatively.
"Did you write that yourself, or do you guys have a manual?"
"Because I've got to say, the dramatic pause timing is excellent, but the delivery feels a little rehearsed." The Void Hunter captain was so thrown off by the critique that he forgot to fire his weapons at the optimal moment. When he finally remembered to shoot, Jake had already moved his ship out of the way and was offering helpful suggestions about improving the dramatic timing for next time. Across the battle zone, similar scenes were playing out as human crews treated the cosmic terror like an elaborate performance that wasn't quite hitting the mark. Empire ship captains, inspired by their human allies, began offering their own commentary about the Void Hunter aesthetic choices and tactical presentations. "The red energy effect is very nice," commented General Quartuyop, the former destroyer of hope. "But have you considered that the slow charging sequence gives your targets too much time to move out of the way?" Supreme Overlord ASDF-K, the teddy bear alien, chimed in with his analysis. "The ship designs are impressively scary, but all that decorative armor probably makes you less maneuverable in actual combat." The Void Hunter morale collapsed faster than their battle formations. These were creatures whose entire identity was built around being the most feared force in the galaxy. When that fear disappeared, replaced by constructive criticism and helpful suggestions, they found themselves facing an existential crisis in the middle of a battle. Their fleet commander made one last, desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "We have consumed 1,000 worlds," he shrieked across all frequencies. "Entire species have been devoured by our endless hunger. And how's that working out for you now?" President Hayes asked from Earth. "Because from where we're sitting, it looks like you've spent so much time being scary that you forgot how to actually fight people who aren't impressed by your whole doom and gloom routine." The Void Hunter fleet began a general retreat, their ships limping away from the solar system, while their crews tried to process what had just happened to them. They had come expecting to terrorize and consume another primitive species. Instead, they had encountered enemies who found their carefully crafted image of cosmic horror genuinely amusing. As the last Void Hunter ship disappeared into hyperspace, probably to find a nice quiet corner of the galaxy where they could think about their life choices, the combined human Empire fleet began cleanup operations and damage assessments. "You know," Jake said to his crew as they watched the enemy retreat, "I think we might have accidentally revolutionized galactic warfare." "By making everyone laugh at themselves," Amy agreed. "By proving that the universe is already absurd enough without taking yourself too seriously on top of it," Jake replied, settling back in his captain's chair with a satisfied smile. The galaxy would never be quite the same again.